Good morning. It's certainly good to be back. When you go places like Saiya and Nairobi, Kenya, it makes you realize just how blessed and fortunate we are to live where we do. If you recall, a few weeks ago I spoke with you about mission projects, and I pointed out that these projects often don't go according to our plans. They're sometimes frustrating. They're often expensive. They're occasionally disappointing. And you may be in places that you don't prefer to be, but they still can be productive and rewarding. This trip was all of the above. Amy asked if I would give a report on our project this morning in place of her message, and I hesitated to do that because I know we all look forward to that, but I hope that you find this meaningful this morning. Stanley Pipkin was a longtime friend. We've grown up together, and so he and I got off to a good start on our trip for about the first 24 hours, and then it went downhill pretty quick. After the first little deal at the Cairo airport, when they told us we aren't going anywhere, and so we were stuck there for 5 days of emails and calls and messages back and forth, driving Doris crazy. And Tom went out of his way to actually go to the immigration department in Nairobi to hurry things along. And finally, we were able to board the plane and get on our way down to Nairobi. Unfortunately, one of Stan's bags with some pretty important contents didn't arrive with us, and it's still somewhere between Lubbock and Nairobi. So maybe they'll find that. When we finally arrived, things kind of went from bad to worse for me with a little case of dysentery. I'm blaming it on some water in Cairo, but Tom saved the day again, getting me some medication and had me back up to about weak calf strength in a couple days. So we got it going. Let's see if our clicker is going to work. We may have to. Well, it worked earlier. There we go. I want to show first a few pictures of the slums in parts of Nairobi, which is a place where lots of unemployed, uneducated people from the countryside end up, and it's particularly a place where we want to avoid any of those kids ending up in. We didn't go down into the slums this time, but Stan wanted to take a look, so we drove along the edges of the Matari slum. There's actually, I think, 6 different ones in Nairobi. That's just a view of some of the people that you find down on the streets, all the way down to little children rummaging through trash to find things they can sell. The living conditions there are atrocious. Kids growing up in this area get an education on how to become pickpockets and thieves, drug dealers, and prostitutes. That's just an example of the water situation that you see everywhere in Kenya. People carting, carrying water along the roadways and whatever means they've got, or just carrying buckets. You know, motorcycles and bicycles are all over the streets carrying all kinds of things. Some things that you don't often see in the U.S. Okay, we finally got out to Saiya, which is about 225 miles west of Nairobi, near Lake Victoria. And it takes 10 or 12 hours to make that trip. I'd like to mention that the roads that the Chinese are building in Kenya are a great improvement, especially around Nairobi itself. They are building a big highway, like an interstate, all the way across Kenya into Uganda and Tanzania. They're building a brand new railroad line, and they're doing lots of things that the corrupt Kenyan government has failed to do for years, but you still have to see it, because there's going to be lots of strings attached at some point. That's that last slide was out at the little orphanage out there. This is actually the high school classroom that is the place where we were working, and since I was there the last time, they've completed the top floor of it and got a roof on it, and it's a very nice looking building now. That's a view of the kitchen and dining hall, and just down below it to the right is the restroom facility. They do have running water in there now, and they can wash their hands, and there's toilets, although they're still African style. There's also, I didn't get it in here, but Tom also has a large building in Nairobi in the city, the Children's Center, where there's about 350 kids that come to school there, and a portion of those are also orphans that live there. But the schools in Kenya are mostly of three types. There's government schools, which charge tuition of somewhere between $300 and $600 a year per child. And there's private schools that are a little higher than that. And then there's charity schools, which are free to the kids that can't afford it. So Tom's school is a charity school. Those kids are supported by donations and by sponsorships. So it doesn't cost these kids anything to get an education there. If in a government school, if the child's fees aren't paid, they send them home. That's on the left is the office building, and this is the girls' dorm that's under construction. That bottom floor is complete, and girls are living in it, and they're working on the second floor while we were there. And also Tom put a plaque on there while we were there that was dedicating that building to the memory of Terry Pipkin, who's Stan's wife that passed away recently. That's inside the girls' dorm. It's kept very neat. And that's the boys' dorm, which is maybe not quite as neat. A guy from Texas bought the school generator that comes on when the power goes out, which is usually once or twice a day, and so that's a blessing. And they installed that at while we were there, actually. That's one of the cooks in the kitchen, and if you look down to his lower right, he's preparing chapati, which is like a big, thick flour tortilla that's fried real greasy, and they're delicious. The kids love those, and they get them about once a week. That's another view of the boys' dorm, and all the belongings that they have are what little is in those little boxes. There's some of the kids going through the serving line. I think they were getting beans and rice that day, which is a pretty standard fare for them. They're going to be quite excited about getting some eggs along with that. Okay, there's Tom back in the one part of the kitchen, and those big stoves are actually wood-burning stoves, and it's always pretty smoky in there. But they do a good job of cooking. They're working in there nearly all day. That's Stan's room in the house where we stayed. It's very comfortable, and you notice it has a shower. There's no running water there, but there is electricity. Okay, this is not what we built. This is a picture of the chicken house that Dr. Bergstrom built in Haiti. And so that's where I got the idea of doing this for the kids in Kenya. And if you'll notice, it has one solid wall on the back, and three sides are just basically a chicken wire frame with a roof on it. And so I sent Tom some dimensions and a picture or two, and told him what we'd like to do. And so he talked to a contractor about doing the masonry work, and he emailed me back a number, and I thought it sounded a little bit high for that, but we sent him a check. So when we got over there, he mentioned that he had enough money that he decided to make a few modifications and little adjustments here and there. So that's what we ended up with. So, you know, I mentioned that things don't always work out according to your plans. It's the Chicken McMansion, I guess. It has over there on the right-hand side, next to that front door, is a little apartment for the caretaker that's going to be taking care of the chickens, and it's about 50% bigger than what we originally planned. So that's okay. That's what it looked like the day that we got there. And so this kind of kind of came together like a Amish barn racing, you know, except missing the Amish people. That's Stan, standing there kind of wondering what in the heck we got into. It looks quite rough to start with. That's the lumber that they delivered us, and we discovered right away that if you lay new lumber on the ground over there, the next morning it'll have termites all over underneath it. So we pretty quick got started with some putting some wood treatment on it to protect from termites. And by the way, that's the main reason that they build so much stuff out of concrete, because if they build it out of wood, it's not going to last very long. We put together some sawhorses so we wouldn't have to be working down on the ground, and those guys had never seen a sawhorse before. Tom decided then that Stan and I looked too old and crippled up to be up on the roof of this, so he had some carpenters come to put the rafters together, and I'm glad that he did. We helped him and did the little stuff that we could, but they were very good at taking that real rough, crooked, odd-shaped wood and putting it together. You can see this guy is splicing a couple of pieces. We were just really impressed with the work they do, especially because of the lack of tools that they have. Okay, that's some of them going on the trusses, and I was just real impressed with how they made those things exactly alike, even with that crooked stuff. And there they are doing masonry work on the top, getting the top of the walls ready to put the roof on. That's it right before the roof gets put on. And that's another view. I was just amazed. If you can think of the most difficult way to do a job, that's the way they do it. You know, they have very few tools, no power tools to speak of, and they have lots of labor. So the concrete is all mixed on the ground. They mix the sand and the stone and the concrete and carry water to it and mix it up and shovel it into a wheelbarrow or buckets and carry it. And it's just a high labor deal. This young man, I forgot what his name is, but he's deaf and dumb. Didn't make any sound except some little cackles, but always had a big smile on his face, and it's one of the hardest working young men I ever saw. One day when they were mixing concrete all day long, he was carrying those buckets of concrete and lifting them up to the top, and they do that for $4 a day. There they go, getting the rafters up on top and almost ready to put the roof on. And this stuff was just going along so quickly. Stan and I, like I said, we're just basically doing little things, helping out, but I think Tom used our presence there as a little leverage with these workers to make them get the job. He'd tell them, you gotta have this roof framed up by dark tonight, and they did. That's it, right before they started the roofing. And there you go, putting the tin on it the next day. I had to keep after them. We wanted lots of ventilation in there for those chickens, and they kept wanting to seal everything up, you know. We finally kind of compromised. There we go. That's the other end of it. So they left portions of it open, and we put some wire mesh up there to keep birds out. But you can see this big door right here on the corner is where you go in, and that's one thing that Tom had. It's just a breezeway there in front where he can take visitors, and they can look through a window and see the chickens in there without actually going into the building. And there they are, about to put plaster on the walls. And you know, at this stage it just looks so rough and messy, but when those guys get done, it's amazing how good it looks. Okay, there's some more of the workers. You can see the guy up in the top left. They just sling that plaster up on the walls, and of course it goes all over the place. But it looks just like a big mess to begin with. Oh, I threw this in there. One of the guys that was doing the labor had a bad case of jiggers when he was a young man, and that's one reason we get these kids shoes, because sand fleas burrow into their feet and cause big lumps to form. And this guy was still crippled up from that he had gotten years ago, and yet he was out there carrying concrete and blocks all day. Okay, this is an example. If you look over on the right-hand side, that's the block wall, and the part in the middle that's brown is where they've just slung the plaster up, and then the left side is where they put a final coat and get it real smooth. That's Dennis. He's an electrician that helps Tom out a lot, and he also works with the kids' choir some and plays the keyboard for the praise band in Nairobi, and just a real gentleman. That's a young man from Nairobi that where we bought the cages, and he brought them all the way out from Nairobi and put them together there in the barn. There's Stan and Freddie up on the rickety scaffold doing some measurements. So that part at the top's where we left it open for the ventilation for the birds. It never gets cold and seldom gets very hot there. It's just an ideal climate. That's the building, just almost complete. At this point, we had been looking for chickens for at least a week, calling all over the place, and had several people that had some, but they were either too old or too young, or not enough of them, or the price was wrong. So we were not having a very good day at this point, because we just we were going to have to leave by the weekend, and the thing was almost finished, and we sure wanted to see some chickens in there. That's a view of the south side of the building. And back around the corner, that's the back. You can see just what a neat job they did. That right there is the room where they'll keep feed and eggs in. And the little apartment looks just about like that too. That's Stan and Freddie doing some final work on the cages. And there I am sanitizing it before we could put any birds in. And lo and behold, at 6 o'clock the next morning, one of these guys finally showed up with 160 chickens. And that was a happy day. That's what they do, is haul these birds for different hatcheries. And they were very impressed with the facility, and they wanted to take a bunch of pictures of us in the barn, and they kept saying what a great deal that was for a school to have that. Tom was ecstatic when we got the birds in there. He was happy as I've ever seen him. And there they are. They're beautiful chickens, just at the age where they're starting to lay eggs. And in fact, within probably an hour, I think we had 4 eggs that laid. There they are. They're standing with the first eggs, which we grabbed and ate for breakfast the next day. That's the little observation window in the front of the thing where people can go in there just to look at the birds, but to get into the other part, they need to wash their shoes off. There I am. There's still a little bit more space for a few more birds, but that's all we could afford at the time, so that's what we got. That's Stan and Freddie and I. And I wish Tom hadn't done that, but he did put a plaque on the outside. And the same day that the chickens arrived, we had our 15th grandchild, little boy, back in Lubbock. That's the first 24 hours egg harvest. Quite a bunch of them. This is Wilson.